You've probably all seen the headline by now. January 3rd, 2026. Early morning. Venezuela. President Nicolas Maduro, a leader who had survived years of sanctions, isolation, and political turmoil, was taken into custody during a U.S. military operation. The world reacted instantly. Analysts flooded television panels. Was this about drugs? Was it about dictatorship? Was it about oil? But tonight, I want to talk to you about a different way of seeing this moment. Because at its core, this event had very little to do with Maduro himself. What happened was a declaration, a signal, a line drawn in public. It marked the moment when a set of rules many of us grew up with, rules about sovereignty, influence, and restraint, were rewritten, abruptly and unapologetically. And while China is central to the story, the deeper issue is how the United States now sees itself and how it has decided to treat its neighbors. I call this the Donroe Doctrine moment. It's not a term I invented, but it captures the turn we're living through with unsettling accuracy. If you think this was just Trump-style theatrics, strongman optics meant to energize a domestic audience, I think that underestimates what's really happening. In my view, this may be the most disruptive shift in U.S. foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, and its battlefield is not Ukraine, not the Middle East. It's America's backyard, Latin America. To understand why this matters so much, we need to step back. Because while U.S. attention was consumed by Iraq, Afghanistan, and later Ukraine, something quiet, but transformational, unfolded right next door. China didn't invade Latin America with troops. It did something far more effective in the 21st century. It embedded itself through trade, through investment, through infrastructure. The numbers alone tell part of the story. In 2000, China, Latin America trade stood at roughly $12 billion. By 2024, that number had reached $518 billion. A 40-fold increase in less than a generation. Today, China is the largest trading partner of Brazil, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, and Argentina. In every major South American economy that actually matters, China has replaced the United States. But trade figures are abstract. So, let's talk about what's happening on the ground. In Peru, China financed and built the port of Chancay, a $3.5 billion deep-water megaport, majority owned by Chinese firms. This isn't just a dock. It's a fully automated logistics hub capable of handling ships too large for the Panama Canal. What does that mean? It creates a direct maritime corridor from Shanghai to South America, bypassing North America entirely. Shipping time drops from 35 days to 23. Costs fall by roughly 20%. Chinese officials call it South America's Shanghai. Peruvian leaders hope it becomes the Singapore of Latin America. And it doesn't stop there. China and Brazil are exploring a transcontinental railway linking Chancay to the Atlantic. That's not just infrastructure. That's a new logistics spine for an entire continent, one designed to reduce reliance on U.S.-controlled trade routes. Then there's the invisible layer. China's state grid has invested over $12.5 billion in Brazil's electricity sector, building ultra-high-voltage transmission lines stretching more than 2,000 kilometers.
These lines power São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro.
If you live in a Brazilian city and the lights turn on, part of that system is Chinese-built. By 2030, Beijing plans to invest another $40 billion. And then there's lithium, the future's bloodstream. Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile form the lithium triangle, holding roughly 60% of global reserves. No lithium means no batteries. No batteries means no electric vehicles. No green transition. China, home to the world's largest battery manufacturers, has been systematically locking in access. So, how did Washington interpret all of this? As a strategic rival constructing a resource extraction empire in America's backyard, not with tanks, but with cables and contracts. The Monroe Doctrine, once enforced by gunboats, had been hollowed out economically. Trump and the political mood he represents decided that era was over. Hours after Maduro's arrest, Trump said, "The Monroe Doctrine was a big deal, but we've gone far beyond it." That wasn't bluster. That was a declaration. The Donroe Doctrine doesn't aim to exclude influence quietly. It aims to force alignment. So, what does this doctrine look like in practice? First, a complete reprioritization. The Western Hemisphere is back at the absolute center of U.S. strategy. The 2025 National Security Strategy devoted more space to Latin America than to Europe or Asia, explicitly labeling extra-hemispheric competitors, China, Russia, Iran, as existential threats. The message is simple: choose sides. Second, economics replaces diplomacy. Tariffs were just the opening act. The real weapon is secondary sanctions, escalating penalties for countries maintaining deep economic ties with China. Mexico is already feeling this pressure, moving to impose steep tariffs on Chinese goods to prevent becoming a backdoor into the U.S. market. Third, military force is no longer implicit, it's explicit. Venezuela proved this wasn't a bluff. U.S. military posture expanded from the Caribbean to Central America, from the Arctic to Antarctica. After Washington delivered an ultimatum over Chinese influence in the Panama Canal, Hutchison Ports sold its holdings. Panama withdrew from the Belt and Road Initiative. Fourth, divide and reward. Bolivia's new president terminated lithium contracts with China and Russia, pivoting to Washington in exchange for IMF credit and development financing. So where does this go? Mexico is the front line. It's the largest U.S. trading partner and China's primary supply chain workaround. Chinese firms build shadow factories there, exploiting USMCA rules. With the agreement up for renegotiation in 2026, Trump isn't just asking for trade concessions. He's demanding security cooperation that amounts to operational influence inside Mexican territory. Brazil is the harder problem. A giant economy. Energy, agriculture, the Amazon. President Lula refuses to choose. Brazil trades deeply with both Beijing and Washington. But when both superpowers demand alignment, how long can balance last? Then there's a quieter flashpoint. Ushuaia, Argentina, the only deepwater port capable of supporting Antarctic operations. China's presence in Antarctica is expanding. The 2025 U.S. strategy explicitly extends Monroe logic southward. That's not coincidence. And then there's the wild card, the Nicaragua Canal, a $50 to $80 billion alternative to Panama, immune to U.S. pressure. Dormant for now, but if China's access to Panama becomes unreliable, this project could return. At this point, some of you might be asking, won't China back down? It can't. China's economy depends on imported resources, Brazilian iron ore, Chilean copper, Bolivian lithium, Venezuelan oil. These aren't luxuries. They're lifelines. If Washington successfully forces Latin America to choose, China faces slow economic strangulation. So China will respond. Within hours of the Venezuela operation, Beijing launched Joint Justice Mission 2025, military exercises simulating blockades near Taiwan. The signal was unmistakable. You act in your hemisphere. We act in ours. This is the escalation trap. Each move justifies the next. This isn't a single crisis like 1962. It's a structural contest over supply chains and economic survival. There is no clean off-ramp. And in all of this, Latin America becomes the arena. For 2 decades, the region benefited from playing both sides. That era is ending. The Donroe Doctrine forces choice. And the cost of choosing wrong has been made very clear. Maduro is now in a Manhattan detention facility. Every leader is watching. Some will comply. Others will resist. Some will hedge until forced. History tells us what happens next. When great powers collide, smaller nations suffer. The Cold War battlegrounds weren't superpowers, they were proxies. Latin America is being pulled back into that role. The Donroe Doctrine isn't just policy. It's a statement. Neutrality is over. America is back home, and it's angry. The question is whether Latin America can still chart its own path, or whether the choice has already been made for it. Here's the thought that keeps me awake. The doctrine assumes the U.S. must and can win, that Latin America will ultimately choose Washington over Beijing. That pressure can undo 20 years of neglect. But what if that assumption is wrong? In May 2025, Xi Jinping hosted the China-CELAC Forum in Beijing, announcing $9 billion in new credit lines. China signed new trade deals with Ecuador and Nicaragua. Colombia joined the Belt and Road. Even as Chinese exports to the U.S. declined, exports to Latin America continued rising. Here's the uncomfortable truth. China offers many countries what the U.S. hasn't: investment without lectures, infrastructure without ultimatums, partnership without conditionality. America offers values. China offers concrete. That's the vulnerability at the heart of the Donroe Doctrine. It tries to win through coercion, a competition already lost through absence. Some countries will submit. Others will resist quietly. And some, when forced, will choose China, not out of loyalty, but because China showed up. The stakes couldn't be higher. This doctrine could succeed. Empires have been built this way before. Or it could fail. And if it fails, it won't be remembered as a revival of American power, but as the moment America lost its backyard. The story isn't over. It's just beginning. The opening shot has been fired. The lines are being drawn. And in Caracas, under U.S. supervision, the ghost of the Monroe Doctrine has risen again, under a new name. And it's hungry. Friends, that's where I'll leave it tonight. Understanding these forces doesn't give us control, but it gives us clarity. And in uncertain times, clarity is the first form of power. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again soon.